We are recording now. Good afternoon, everybody. It is Wednesday, March 24th, 2021, and this is the UOS Lunch and Learn, which has been meeting now via Zoom for about a year, and hopefully we'll get back in person in the nearish future, I hope. And we are, of course, in our Mitzvah Shiur. Each week we do a new Mitzvah. And we usually do the mitzvot related to the parsha, but today this is the last of 4 weeks when we have been doing mitzvot from the Torah regarding Pesach. And today's class is sponsored by Mike Levy and family in memory of his mother, Jill, whose Yetziyat is coming up. And we thank you, Mike, and your family for sponsoring. And we take a moment to remember Jill and recall how much we miss her and how much she meant to our community and to your family, and the great legacy that she left behind of her wonderful family and her communal activism and her ability to touch the lives of so many people through her positive attitude and her fighting spirit. And we certainly remember that as she was ill, she really showed tremendous courage and tremendous faith. And so we remember her in those ways and so many more ways today. And we again thank the Levies for sponsoring.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Of course, today's mitzvah that we're going to discuss is the central mitzvah that we are all going to engage in on Saturday night and Sunday night. The mitzvah of Sipur, Yetziyat, Mitzrayim, retelling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. That is the fundamental responsibility that we have on both of those nights. We do it through storytelling and through singing and through Torah study. Today, we're going to discuss a specific element, a specific question that has been brought up in relation to this mitzvah. Let's jump right in, of course, as we normally do, with the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch, the medieval work whose authorship we really don't know, but in the introduction, he says that he wrote the book for his son, so when his son had time on Shabbat afternoon, instead of wasting time, he would have something to study. And what he does in this book, as we've noted, is he goes through all 613 mitzvot of the Torah. He tells us what the mitzvah is. He tells us some of the philosophical ideas or the thought ideas behind each mitzvah, and gives us a basic outline of the laws of the mitzvah. And so this is mitzvah number 21. And let's begin. I'll read it together. Sefer HaChinuch Chaf Aleph, Mitzvah 21, Mitzvah Sipur Yitzyat Mitzrayim. The 21st mitzvah in the Torah is the commandment to recount the Exodus from Egypt. L'saper be'inyan Yitziyat Mitzrayim b'leil tetvav b'Nisan, to tell about the Exodus from the Egypt, and the English is on the bottom there, on the night of the 15th of Nisan, the first night of Pesach. Kol echad kefit sechot l'shono, each person according to their own power of expression. So this is just an interesting place to stop. We, most of us at our Seder, are not going to rely on the power of our expression at the Seder. We are going to rely on the Haggadah at the Seder, because the Haggadah is the book that we have to make sure that we hit all the important elements of the story. But originally, when the Torah was given and the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziyat Mitzrayim was given to the Jewish people, there was no Haggadah. And people did it as we see here, lefi tzechot l'shono, or lefi tzechot l'shonam, in accordance with the power of their expression. Ulahalel l'shabeach l'shem yitbarach. So this is also an interesting place to stop. Not only are we commanded to tell the story, to recount the Exodus, as it says here, not only are we obligated to do that, but we are also obligated to laud and praise God. We are obligated to praise God. We're going to come back to this in a little while, but we're seeing now that according to the Sefer HaChinuch, an element of the story of Sipur Yetziyat Mitzrayim is Hallel v'hoda'ah, thanksgiving, or Hallel and Shevach, which means we could tell the entire story of the Exodus from Egypt. We could read the verses from the Bible. We could read the Mishnayot and the Midrashim and the Gemarot, and we could read all the aspects of the Haggadah. But if we don't say Hallel, if we don't have elements of praise to God, then according to the Sefer HaChinuch, we have not fulfilled the mitzvah properly. So we have to make sure to do that. To thank God for all the miracles that he did for us. There, Shene'emar, V'higadeta Levincha. The pasuk that we're learning this from is Shemot Yud Gimel, pasuk Chet, chapter 13, verse 8. V'higadeta Levincha, you shall tell your children. Right? That is what we are obligated to do, to tell it to other people. V'kvar pirshu chachamim, the mitzvah hagadah zohi belel tetvav b'nisan. The rabbis have explained already that this obligation is incumbent on us on the night of the 15th of Nisan. Bishat achilat matzah, when it is the time for eating matzah, which is why when it comes to the Seder, we have to wait until Tzeit HaKochavim. We have to wait until nightfall, because that's when the proper time to eat matzah is, and the proper time to tell the story is when it's the proper time to eat matzah. So we have to make sure we start at the right time. And the Torah says, "V'gata lebincha," you should tell your sons. It doesn't mean only your sons. Rather, ela afilu im kol birya. We could fulfill the mitzvah of telling the story to anybody. It does not have to be our sons. Not everyone has children of their own at the Seder. But what we see here as well is ideally, we should be telling the story to somebody else. Meaning, ideally, the minimum Seder crowd should be 2 people. Now, of course, the Mishnah says if you don't have 2 people present and you're alone for the Seder, unfortunately, last year we became familiar with people who had to be alone for the Seder. Hopefully not this year. If you're alone for the Seder, you still have to tell yourself the story. But ideally, we should be telling the story to somebody else. Okay. Now, we go to Sharshei HaMitzvah, the roots of the mitzvah, meaning what's the reason for the mitzvah. Misharshei mitzvah zo masha katuv b'karban pesach ve'ein min hatema. Right, again, the same. We saw this already multiple times, that we are supposed to tell the story, as we learned when we studied the reasons for the Karban Pesach, in order to remember the miracles that God did for us when we left Egypt. Now, the Sefer HaChinuch is going to address another question. There are so many mitzvot that we do in order to remember the Exodus from Egypt. Why do I need so many mitzvot for this one thing? So he says, this is not something that should surprise us. And there's no wonder, he says, if there are many commandments that come about this, positive commandments and negative commandments, since it is a great foundation and a strong pillar in our Torah and our faith. Yetziyat Mitzrayim is very important. As we said a few weeks ago, I think Zach mentioned this, that Yetziyat Mitzrayim represents our national formation, right? That's when we became a nation. So, of course, we have many mitzvot which remind us of that event. However, the Sefer HaChinuch says something else. He says as follows, and therefore we always say in memory of Exodus from Egypt, Zecher Yitzyat Mitzrayim, for example, on Shabbos. When we say Kiddush on Shabbos, when it's not Yom Tov, we say Zecher Yitzyat Mitzrayim in the Kiddush for Shabbat. What does Yitzyat Mitzrayim have to do with Shabbat? So here's the answer. Since it is a sign and a total proof for the creation of the world, and there is a primordial God that has will and ability. He controls all of what exists, and it is in his hand to change them according to what he desires at any time, as he did in Egypt when he changed the natural processes of the world for our sake. What the Sefer HaChinuch is doing here, he's drawing our attention to the fact that the Exodus from Egypt has a lot to do with Shabbat. Because if you remember, we rest on Shabbat to symbolize and to testify that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. That is a fundamental of our faith, belief in God and belief that God created the world. So says the Sefer HaChinuch, the same thing applies to Pesach. But on Pesach, it was witnessed by people. The creation of the world wasn't witnessed by people. But the Pesach, the fact that God is in control of nature, which was borne out by the plagues that he brought on Egypt. So the fact that God is in control of nature is a fundamental aspect of our faith. It's really the faith in God. That's what we believe. That's the God that we believe in. So he answers two questions here. One which he asked and one which he didn't ask, but we mentioned. He answered the first question he answers is, why do we have so many mitzvot about this? Because the mitzvot are not only about remembering Egypt, they are about remembering specifically that God controls nature, meaning remembering what happened in Egypt is an acclamation, a declaration of faith, the fundamental faith. So that's why there are so many mitzvot connected to it. And the question we asked is, what does that do with Shabbos? Well, that's easy now. Shabbos is also about recognizing God is in control of nature, and that's one of the main lessons of the story of Mitray. Okay, so with that, yes, Zach, go ahead.
Okay, I did. I could not resist. I think it's another layer of why we have to remember Shabbat, because first time from the moment of creation, God created a nation who will observe Shabbat. This is,
okay,
I think,
great.
it's a very important statement, because
Yes.
leaving Egypt led us to Mount Sinai for Torah, and Torah commandment is observe Shabbat, and it's first time, not just person, not like Avraham. We have a differences.
Right. Okay. Beautiful. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. That's a third reason. Fantastic. Okay. So now I have a question. This is a question which is asked by a number of sources. We have two mitzvot related to the memory of Yetziyat Mitzrayim. One of them is the mitzvah that we're talking about tonight, to tell the story of Yetziyat Mitzrayim. But there's another mitzvah that we have, which we're obligated to do twice a day, which is Zichirat Yitzyat Mitzrayim, remembering the exodus from Egypt. Right? On the Seder, we have the mitzvah of retelling the story of the exodus from Egypt. But every day, we have a mitzvah incumbent on us, once during the day, once at night, to remember Yetziyat Mitzrayim. So the question is, what's the difference? Practically speaking, what's the difference between them? Or maybe there is no difference between them. But if there's no difference between them, then we wouldn't have two separate mitzvot. So that's my question. Anybody want to try to chime in on that? Carol?
Well, one is telling the story of what happened. The other one, it's very specific. We have to remember leaving Egypt.
Okay.
And I'm not really sure what those two things mean, but they're different.
Right. So we have to figure out, if Carol's right, what are the added elements of Sipur Yitzyat Mitzrayim? Because Carol is right. Zechirat Yitzyat Mitzrayim, really, we have to remember that God took us out of Egypt. There's nothing about the slavery. There's nothing about the miracles, right? And the way we fulfill that mitzvah, generally speaking, on a daily basis, is the third paragraph of Shema, right? Third paragraph of Shema. I'll just get the text, just to quickly share it. And you'll see it's pretty bare in terms of what we say. What we say is, Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim lihiyot lachem le'elokim, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, which is a pasuk in Bamidbar. I am the Lord your God, right, who took you out of Egypt to be your God. That's it. Okay? There's not a lot of detail there. I'm sure a lot of people would like that to be the text of the Haggadah. We'd get to the food a lot quicker. But that's not the case. So,
Rabbi,
We have to figure it out. So definitely Carol is putting us on the right track. There are definitely more elements in Sipur Yitzyat Mitzrayim than there are in Zechir Yitzyat Mitzrayim, and we have to identify them. And that's what we're going to do right after Chana and Zach. Go ahead, Chana.
I think that when you say that we are obligated to score at Sipur Yitziat Mitzrayim, it's even more so, twice a day, which means it has to penetrate to your brain. It's like kind of what we say in Hebrew, שטיפת מוח, like to remember it and not to forget the miracle and what happened and how God was so great and made so many miracles for us. So it's like, don't forget.
So then, Chana, if that's true, then what's the difference between that and Sipur? If remembering requires all those details, then what are we doing differently at the Seder?
The Seder is once a year, but this
What's the difference, though? Yes, of course, but meaning there are two mitzvot counted in the Torah: Zechirat Yitziat Mitzrayim and Sipur Yitziat Mitzrayim.
Yeah, but when you
so why does the Torah? If the Torah gives us two separate mitzvot, what's the difference between them?
But you will forget if it's once a year.
So I agree, but I'm asking, what's the difference between the mitzvot? That's what we have to figure out. Okay, here we go. Let's hold the questions now, so we can get to some of the material. Then we'll come back to questions. Write down your question. We'll get to it. Okay. So
no question. I want to say something.
Well, we're going to get to the material, and whatever you want to say, just hold off, and you'll say it. We'll say it afterwards because I don't want to run out of time. Okay, here we go. So the Minchas Chinuch we've talked about before is one of the commentaries on the Sefer HaChinuch asked the question: V'hinei lechora tzarich iyun al harambam demone hamitzvah l'saper bilel tetvav. The Rambam counts as a separate mitzvah of telling the story on the 15th. Umay ma'al yuta delel ze mikol halelot. What added elements, or what is better or special about that night from every night? Ha mitzvah lahaskir Yitziat Mitzrayim b'chol yom uv'chol laila. There's an obligation to remember the story of the Exodus every day and every night. So what's so special about the Seder night? Okay, so that's the question. So first he suggests an answer and rejects it. V'gam im lomar ditamid dai behirhur. Maybe you want to say that on the Seder night, all you're obligated to do is mentally, not on the Seder night, then on a regular day, that all you're, like today, that all you're obligated to do is remember mentally and not speak it out verbally. Ayin b'megillah v'chan dichtiv v'galta tzarich haggadah b'peh zot omeret. I'm sorry, this is not what I wanted. I got the wrong thing, but he says no. Even the daily mitzvah of remembering is verbal. So that's not the difference, because you could say, oh, the difference is you tell a story out loud and you remember mentally. So every day of the year, day and night, you could just remember mentally, and at the Seder you have to say it verbally. No, says the Minchas Chinuch, both of them require a verbal declaration. So we're still stuck. What's the difference? So Rabbi Soloveitchik's grandfather, Rabbi Chaim Brisker, also famously asked this question, and he came up with 3 differences between the daily mitzvah of remembering the Exodus and the yearly obligation of retelling the story of the Exodus. And here's what he says, and you will see that these all bear out in the Haggadah. So he says as follows: Hinei b'chol laila yesh mitzvah shel zechirat Yitziat Mitzrayim. Every night there is an obligation to recall Yitziat Mitzrayim. V'imkein ma nitosaf belel Pesach b'mitzvat Sipur Yitzyat Mitzrayim. What do we add on Pesach night in the mitzvah of telling the story? She'ein b'schira shel kol shana, which is not included in the daily mitzvah. V'nira lomar sheish gimel chilukim ben hamitzvah shel zechirat Yitzyat Mitzrayim laHamitzvah shel Sipur Yitzyat Mitzrayim. He says there are three distinctions between the two mitzvot. Number one, in the blue underline, lekayem mitzvat zechira ein tzarich ela lahaskir la'atzmo Yetziyat Mitzrayim. We said this, alluded to this. When it comes to the mitzvah of remembering, all you need to do is remember it to yourself. If I'm davening at home all by myself, and I say that third paragraph of Shema with that one paltry line about the Exodus, and no one else hears me, right? If you daven in a forest and no one else is there, does anyone hear you, I guess? I have fulfilled my mitzvah 100%. 100%. However, says Reb Chaim, aval b'sipur Yetziyat Mitzrayim, when it comes to telling the story, ha-mitzvah hi l'saper le'acher. You are obligated to tell someone else the story, which makes sense, right? We don't tell stories to ourselves. I made a comment this morning that sometimes I like to talk to myself because when I do, I'm definitely the smartest person in the room. But when anyone else is in the room, chances are I'm not. So that works for Yetziyat Mitzrayim, but that does not work for retelling the story. A story is told to somebody else. So in order to fulfill the mitzvah, ideally, of course, you have to tell it to somebody else. Now, then Reb Chaim says that you're supposed to do it derech she'elah v'tshuva, which I think you could add as another element even. Not only do you have to tell the story to someone else, which is one difference, I would say 1A, you have to tell it through question and answer. And that bears itself out also in the Haggadah. We have 4 questions in the Haggadah. We have the 4 sons who ask questions in the Haggadah. We have two more times also. Pesach, Matzah, Umaror. We ask, what is Pesach, what is Matzah, what is Maror? And we answer those questions. So sprinkled throughout the Haggadah are questions and then answers. So you're obligated, says Reb Chaim, to tell the story to somebody else in question and answer format. So that's 1 and 1A. Okay, number 2, where the yellow outline is. B'sipur tzarich l'saper kol ha'hishtal shelot v'tzarich lahatchil b'genut u'l'sayim b'shevach. When it comes to the story, we have to tell all of the details, like Carol said. The slavery, the plagues, the splitting of the sea, the leaving quickly so we couldn't eat bread and we had to have matzah. We have to have all of those details. Not only that, we must start with the negative and begin with the positive. This is a fundamental rule of the Seder. Matchil b'genut u'misayim b'shevach. And we do that in 2 ways based on a disagreement in the Talmud. What do we start out with? Avadim hayinu leparim Mitzrayim. That's the negative. And then we talk about freedom. We also say Arami Oved Avi. My ancestor was an idolater. We start with a physical negative and a spiritual negative, and then we say we got to the Torah. So we end with a physical positive, leaving Egypt, and end with a spiritual positive, getting the Torah. So that's number 2. Number 2 is, it's 2 and 2A. 2 is we have to tell all of the details while we do it in a specific order. 2A, specific order, starting with the negative and ending with the positive. And finally, number 3, the orange line. Mitzvah l'saper ta'amei ha-mitzvot shel oto halayla kamo shekatuv, Rabban Gamliel haya omer, kol shelo amar shloshad divarim elu bepesach lo yatzei dei chovato. We have to specify while we tell the story that there are elements of the story, the Pesach, the Matzah, and the Maror, and we are obligated to declare what those things symbolize. That is a very important part of the Seder. There are guides out there for what to do if you're short on time at the Seder. Most of them are written for Israeli soldiers. And they all include that end part of the Magid. Rabban Gamliel haya omer, kol shelo amar shlosha divarim elu, lo yatsa yedei chovato. If you have not said the following three things, you have not fulfilled your obligation. Ve'elu hein, and these are they. These are what they are. Pesach, matzah, umaror. And then we ask questions. Pesach al shumma. Why do we eat the carbon Pesach? Maror al shumma. Why do we eat the maror? Matzah al shumma. Why do we eat the maror? Again, questions. So number 3 is we have to use props at the Seder. I'm sorry, that's later. We have to explain all of the mitzvot at the Seder. I'm going to stop here, quickly review, then take the comments. So Reb Chaim Soloveitchik says, the difference between the mitzvah of remembering daily and telling the story once a year or twice a year, because we live in the diaspora, is all year long, I just have to say, God took us out of Egypt, period. On Pesach night, I have to tell it I have to tell it to somebody else. I'm sorry, all year long, I can just do that to myself. On the Seder night, I have to tell someone else in question and answer format. Number 2, all year long, I can just mention the fact that God took us out of Egypt. On Pesach night, I need all of the details, and it must start with a negative and end with a positive. And number 3, all year long, I don't have to talk about any mitzvot related to that mitzvah. When it comes to the Seder night, I have to explain the mitzvot. Okay. We're still not done. We got others, but we'll take some comments. Okay, Mom, you had a comment.
You sort of answered it because I would say at the Seder, you're actually doing physical things. You're eating the maror, you're doing the salt water.
Right.
That's what you sort of answered, but rather than just telling and asking and answering, you're actually doing something physical.
Great. So let me jump towards the end, because this was Rabbi Chaim Brisker, Rabbi Soloveitchik's grandfather. Rabbi Soloveitchik himself added to his grandfather's approach and added a few things. I have them down here. One of them is props, right? The 5th aspect of the Seder, he says, he has a whole article, 9 aspects of the Seder. The 5th aspect of Sipur Yitzyat Mitzrayim is the central role that the meal and food play at the Seder. Here is another more basic reason for Kiddush playing a role in the Sipur Yitzyat Mitzrayim. Sipur Yitzyat Mitzrayim contains within it 2 elements. One is the recitation of certain passages. Second is the element of performing certain actions, eating of certain foods. When one eats matzah, maror, and korban pesach on the Seder night, one fulfills these specific mitzvot. However, in addition, through the eating of these foods, one is able to teach and convey the message of Geulat Mitzrayim, the redemption from Egypt. They function as audio-visual aids in our educational scheme, namely the Seder. So the props play a role in the food, play a role of props at the Seder. Okay, good. So that took care of that. Excellent. Let's see. Ellie.
Well, 2 things. First of all, I thought it was about, the difference was that it was about experiencing it again, like reliving it again, as if it was you, right? Like that's what.
Excellent.
So I thought it was about, we have to do that once a year, but we couldn't do that twice a day. So twice a day we remember back, but
Good.
Actually live it. That's what I thought it was. But the other thing was,
That's a good one. I don't think that's on here. Hold on one second. I think that may be on here. Yes.
okay.
Meaning,
The other thing.
One second, Ellie. This is letter F down here. Relevance. In every generation, a person should look upon himself as he personally had come out of Egypt. And then we talk about elements of, and we say a few. Rabbi Soloveitchik says that in every generation, here it is. In every generation, here, Vihisha Amda, for not only one tyrant has risen up against us to destroy us, but in every generation, tyrants have sought to destroy us, and God has redeemed us. So we see ourselves not only as having left then, but we see ourselves almost in a constant state of this type of redemption, that all through the years, even though people have taken swings at us, and some of them have been highly successful, nonetheless, they have not succeeded in wiping us out. So yes, that's another difference. When it comes to the daily remembering, I don't have to talk about the relevance at all. When it comes to this one, I have to add contemporary relevance. Good. Okay. Ellie, go ahead.
I think I'm right about this. Rabbi Schneerson, after his wife died, he always had his Seders on his own because everybody wanted him and, you know, he couldn't choose or whatever. So he obviously would have known what you've just told us. So how would he justify that he wasn't actually telling anybody?
That's a great question. I did not know that. I
hope I'm right about that, but
I have a connection to, I've recently made a connection with a scholar of Chabad Chassidut. I am going to ask him that question.
Thank you. Well, I hope I'm right. But
he just actually wrote a book about the Rebbe. His name is Eli.
Because last year I comforted myself with that when I was on my own. Like I thought, oh, look, I'm in good company.
Yes. I mean, no, first of all, that's great. And I love that. And I'm going to find out from him. Thank you. I didn't know that. We'll
find out if I'm right. Find out if I'm right first. Yeah.
We will. I will. Okay. Nitza.
Every day we remember that, and we kind of telling it during the time that you pray, but it becomes like a robot that you are doing a habit. Where on this day, that's not a habit. You go into the habit and you analyze it.
Great.
And you anchor back into your very belief.
Oh, that's very nice. Okay, that's nice. That's nice, Nitza. So what Nitza is saying is all the added elements that we've just talked about are the equivalent, this is very relevant, of a booster shot. This is the booster shot. We're supposed to remember Yitzyat Mitzrayim because it reminds us that God can do anything and that God formed the Jewish people and God formed the people that keep Shabbat, as Zach said. But it gets rote, it gets old. So once a year, we come back and we pack it in and we talk about every conceivable element of that event so that for the next 365 days, it's a stronger part of our religious life. Wonderful. I love it. Okay, good. Let's continue because there are some more elements that Rabbi Soloveitchik added to his grandfather. So far we have 3. Now Rabbi Soloveitchik adds, and here they are. This is from the one of the Rabbi Haggadah, written by Rabbi Soloveitchik's grandson, which includes a lot of his lectures. And he says, "V'nireh lahosif." Everyone can see it right here. "V'nireh lahosif." Sorry, it's not in English, but if you want to take notes, he says, I could add what my grandfather said. Bazed b'mitzvot Sipur Yitzyat Mitzrayim nichlal gam d'trichim lahalel ulahodot. Remember, we said that the Sefer HaChinuch said this, that when it comes to the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzyat Mitzrayim on Pesach, we must add the element of praise and thanksgiving. If we don't, then we're not doing enough. We're not doing the job properly. Al zeh shotzeinu miMitzrayim v'lekach anu korim Hallel. That's why we have Hallel at the Seder, right? What's Hallel doing there? Because we have an obligation to praise and thank. Ach, mitzvah tzechir Mitzrayim, he raka zechira. However, the daily mitzvah of remembering Egypt, that's just remembering. There's no obligation to thank God there. That's one. Yeah, that's one. He adds that one about. So now we have 4 in the name of the Soloveitchik family. The 3 that the grandfather gave, and 1 that Rabbi Soloveitchik gave. And then we have now we have more. We found Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik himself also suggested that we have a specific obligation to do it on that night. On that night, which is why, this is a very technical thing, I'll run through it. A lot of people like to start the Seder early. Rabbi Soloveitchik's grandfather says we cannot start the Seder early because the first cup of wine is the Kiddush cup, right? But each cup of wine is an aspect of telling the story. And you can only tell the story on that night. So if you start at 6 o'clock, it's not Pesach. It's not that night. So that's why we have to start even Kiddush, not just drinking, even the Kiddush, because we talk about Yetziyat Mitzrayim in the Kiddush, has to be at night. So that's also a difference, right? The mitzvah of remembering Yitzyat Mitzrayim is every day. The mitzvah of Sipur Yitzyat Mitzrayim is specifically to that day, and therefore all the mitzvot connected to it have to be on that day. Okay. Also, he suggests, oh, I saw this in a commentary. I'm sorry, I forgot to label this. This is a commentary on the Minchas Chinuch. When it comes to the mitzvah, I'll just tell it outside. When it comes to the mitzvah of remembering, even if I don't know Hebrew and I read that pasuk, I fulfilled the obligation of remembering. When it comes to telling the story, I have to understand what I'm saying, right? What good is a story if I don't understand what I'm telling people? And the people who are hearing it don't understand what they're hearing, right? So that's interesting. There are maybe aspects of the Seder, of the Haggadah, that we should say in English, or at least read in translation along as we're going through the Hebrew. Because or maybe some people should read the whole Haggadah in English. Because if I don't understand what I'm saying, what kind of story is that? So that's another element of a difference. It's people don't realize this when it comes to like the mitzvah of Megillah. I don't have to understand it. As long as the Megillah is read in Hebrew and I hear every word, it doesn't mean anything to me. It's like Goldilocks. Doesn't make a difference. I fulfilled my obligation. This is a mitzvah to hear it. Even if it's interesting, I just have to hear the words. Here, the mitzvah to tell the story, a whole new level of obligation. Okay, next. I mentioned Rabbi Soloveitchik has this article, 9 aspects of the Haggadah. Before we go into them, I'll ask one more time. Has anyone thought of any other differences? Now I've lost track. We have like 5 or 6 already. Any other differences between the obligation to remember the Exodus, the daily mitzvah to remember the Exodus, and the twice yearly mitzvah for us in the diaspora to retell the story? Okay, Zach, please unmute.
I think it's another level which I was lucky this year. 2 days ago, I finished Masechta Pesuchim.
Mazel tov.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I was so excited. The first time in my life, I felt with my skin and my intellect how timeless we are. I was studying, and it happened quite late. Haggadah story was discussed by our sages at the end of this Masechta. And every time when I was reading additional point of discussion, it brought me to the Seder night, which I understood first time how much we are timeless. I think this is another level what makes us important to have Haggadah and Seder. I felt so attached to those sages who were talking about it 1800, 1900 years ago. I would suggest everyone at this class next year, do yourself a favor. 2 weeks before Seder, study Masechta Pesuchim from approximately page 105.
The 10th chapter. The 10th chapter, the final chapter of Pesuchim is the chapter that runs basically through the Haggadah. And what Zach is saying is so true that you realize that with minor differences, their Seder was just like our Seder. Now we have a lot more texts, but the building blocks of the Seder are the same, and it gives you a real connection. It's hard to connect the way the sages kept Shabbos to the way we keep Shabbos because we live in such a different type of life. But the Seder table, they would probably more or less, except for Dayenu and who knows one, recognize our Seder, and we would more or less recognize their Seder. Excellent point, Zach. All right, let's look at Rabbi Soloveitchik's additional comments. So first of all, he says that the Seder night must include Torah study, which the remembering does not require. And if you look carefully at the Haggadah, we have Mishnah, Talmud, and Midrash, all woven in, besides Torah verses themselves, obviously, all woven in to the Seder. And so we are obligated to study Torah as part of that. Meaning, I think what the message is that we can't really have a significant nation building experience unless it is focused on Torah study, because that is the national pastime of the Jewish people. Not baseball. Baseball's the second one, right? That is the national pastime of the Jewish people, and therefore we have to make sure that we include Torah study in it. Next, we also have to teach, right? We don't only study, we also teach. Again, v'higadata lebincha, we are obligated to tell the story to others. That's the fundamental obligation of the night. As I said before, a question and answer form, we covered that already. We also covered props, food as props. We also covered Thanksgiving and praise. We also covered relevance. So not all of these are new. And so those are the elements that Rabbi Soloveitchik has that distinguish Sipur Yetziyat Mitzrayim from Zechirat Yetziyat Mitzrayim. It's a night which has a totally different feel than the daily mitzvah. It's a multi-generational question and answer forum on God and the miracles that God did when He took Bnei Yisrael out of Mitzrayim. So those are the important distinctions as we talked about, and they all point to the uniqueness, the special nature of this mitzvah of Sipur Yetziyat Mitzrayim, and how it's different from the regular obligation of telling the story of Egypt.
Rabbi?
So thank you, everybody,
Rabbi, can
for
I say
joining.
something?
I wish you all a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Yes, Chana.
First of all, I have a question. I want to say a comment. It reminds me that also for Shabbat, you say Shamor et Yom HaShabbat ve'Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. So Zachor, remember, and Shamor, do it, right? So
Yes.
actually guard the Shabbat. So it's kind of the same. Remember the Yetziyat Mitzrayim and V'higadata lebincha, do it, tell the
Well,
story.
Shamor,
So-
yeah, but traditionally Shamor is normally the low ta'ases of Shabbat. Because the truth is, if you think about it on Shabbat, there are not that many things we're obligated to do. Zachor is Zachrehu bayayin. We have to remember the Shabbat, by saying Kiddush over wine.
Uh-huh.
And Shamor refers to the things we're not supposed to do, which create the beautiful atmosphere. All those things we're not supposed to do are in the service of the atmosphere of Shabbat, which then gives us time to do other things like studying Torah, spending time with our family, eating a meal and not rushing off, right? All of those lo tases give us, like even something as simple as not cooking on Shabbat. Why? Well, the fundamental answer is because we're not supposed to be creative on Shabbat. On Shabbat, God, we remember that God is in charge. So we sort of take a step back from creating. God's in charge. But another reason is the meal's done, meaning whoever is normally involved in cooking the meal in the house doesn't have to do it on Shabbat. That person or those people can sit with everybody else. The meal is ready. No additional preparation is necessary. And everyone gets to sit and enjoy the time together. So even something like that, we often get hung up. There are so many lo ta'aseh, so many things we're not allowed to do on Shabbos, but they are all in service of creating an atmosphere on Shabbos, which is almost impossible to recreate during the week when we don't have those prohibitions. So yeah, okay.
Okay,
So-
one more question that
Yes,
I have for
Hannah,
you.
please.
Regarding tonight at 8:15,
Yes.
you give a lecture. Can you record it and then send it to me, please? Because I'll not be able
I
to
will record it.
attend. What?
I will record it and send it to the whole shul. Yes.
And send it because I have to pick up my daughter from the airport, please.
Oh, very nice. That's up. Oseket b'mitzvah, piturami mitzvah.
No, I really want to hear that lesson, that class.
It's
So
going to be
please,
rapid fire. We have 15 divrei Torah, one for each step of the Seder.
okay. So and
So
then
bring a
can you send
pen,
it
but
to
I'm
me
also going to
as
send
soon
them
as-
out.
So send it to me before, like as soon as you can, because I really want to listen to it and take some things for the kids
Okay.
in the Seder.
I will send it as soon as I can, but I promise you I can't send it before I do it.
Oh, sure. Okay, תודה,
All
תודה
right.
רבה רבה. Thank
Chag
you.
kasher v'sameach, everyone. Have a
Amen.
wonderful Pesach.
Amen.
Sheila, do you want to say something? You have to unmute yourself. Sheila, you have to unmute yourself. No, you're still muted, Sheila.
Okay.
There you go. There you go.
Okay. Just two things. I would like Robin to repeat her question about the Chabad rabbi that published something in.
Ellie said that I had mentioned that the ideal way to have the Seder is with somebody else. But Ellie mentioned that her understanding is that after the Lubavitcher Rebbe's wife died, he chose to have a Seder by himself, which seems to go against the preferred way. So I'm gonna snoop around and see what I could find.
Okay. All right. Another question. Ruthie Schulman, she had done a class on hair coverings, comparing the Jewish woman with a Muslim. There was a Muslim woman. They did a class together. Is that recorded?
Yeah, I believe it was recorded. We'll try to send that out. I'll try to send out a whole series of recordings of recent classes.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. Okay.
Okay, Rabbi.
Yes.
There is one more thing that I would like to share, which is really, really nice. I got a WhatsApp about why we say Pesach